In Ecuador, at least 4 people died during a shooting in Global South in Guayaquil. South Africa's indigenous Khoisan San peoples have gone to court to block the construction of the planned African headquarters for online retail giant Amazon. In Nigeria, jihadists kidnapped 20 children in a town from Borno State where Islamist militants wage a more than decade-long insurgence. Hi, this is From the South. I'm your news anchor, Diego Martin, from the TeleSUR studios in Havana. We begin with the news. In Ecuador, at least 4 people died during a shooting in Global South in Guayaquil. This Friday night, there was a shooting in the Playita del Guasmo sector in the south of Guayaquil, which caused 4 deaths and 11 injuries. Videos on social media showed several people lying on the sidewalks and in one of the sports fields in the area. Armed forces carry out a joint pursuit and capture operation by land and speedboats in the Playita del Guasmo sector. Meanwhile, police protection was sent to the hospital where the injured were transferred to. Until now, in Guayaquil, at least 50 murders have been recorded in the first days of 2022. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador demands fair treatment of Argentina from the International Monetary Fund. On Friday, the President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, demanded that the International Monetary Fund treat Argentina fairly and urged it to take responsibility for Argentina's excessive debt. He also called on the IMF's leaders to act with honesty and ethics and just recognize that they made the mistake of giving loans to a bankrupt government of former President Mauricio Macri, aggravating Argentina's economic and financial crisis. López Obrador has strengthened ties with fellow leftist Alberto Fernandez, who in February 2021 made an official visit to Mexico and in 2019, as president-elect, was received by Obrador again.
I would like to take this opportunity to call on the International Monetary Fund to give Argentina a fair deal, to make the International Monetary Fund assume his responsibility for Argentina's excessive indebtedness. Being honest, Ética, they should recognize that they made the mistake of giving credits to the previous government beyond what was reasonable.
In Mexico, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador announced that the Mexican government has purchased the Deer Park refinery located in the state of Texas, United States. López Obrador also informed that the federal government decided to acquire the part administered by Shell so that 100% of the shares of the plant would belong to the Mexican state. The president also said that Deer Park has the capacity to process 320,000 barrels per day and affirmed that the purchase represents an advance in the purpose of achieving self-sufficiency in energy matters in the North American nation.
Yesterday, what was due was paid so that Mexico is the owner. The people of Mexico are the owners of the Deer Park refinery. As of yesterday, the refinery belongs to the Mexican nation.
On Thursday, a new migrants caravan left Tapachula heading to the U.S. This is the first caravan in 2022 that leaves for the United States from Tapachula City in the state of Chiapas in Mexico, but the second attempt of the dangerous journey. It's a 500-people group mainly made up of Central Americans, Colombians, Haitians, and Africans. Among them, families traveling with minors. Last year, several caravans with thousands of migrants left the city, but most of them were stopped and dismantled by the Mexican security forces. Before undertaking their long journey, they tried to obtain documents that would allow them free transit through Mexican territory from the offices of the National Institute of Migration. The United Kingdom announced a removal of COVID-19 restrictions despite the surge in the Omicron cases. While other countries such as Japan, Germany, and India are tightening their measures to fight COVID-19, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Wednesday that most restrictions will be lifted in this country to curb the spread of the Omicron variant. The government has already announced that from the 27th of January, regulations on mask wearing, social distancing, compulsory testing, and vaccine passports will be removed. UK's Health Security Agency backs his decision and says the population's behavior over the next 4 weeks will determine whether cases of COVID-19 rise or fall. In the meantime, WHO Director Tedros Adhanom says dismissing Omicron is unwise, since the dominant strain continues to flare new outbreaks from Latin America to East Asia. At L'Hospitalet de Llobregat in Spain, ICU staff declared to be exhausted by COVID battle. Although more than 90% of Spain's population over the age of 12 has been vaccinated, the nation suffers an explosion of Omicron infections, giving it one of Europe's highest incidence rates in recent weeks. Seemingly milder for some, but still highly contagious, Omicron has filled intensive care units again. In Catalonia, one of Spain's most populous regions, COVID patients are taking up more than 42% of intensive care beds. The impact for staff working through a nearly 2-year pandemic is increasingly evident, triggering unprecedented levels of stress and COVID infections. The staff keeps on working in the hope this wave is on the verge of peaking. The Ukrainian Minister of Health, Viktor Lyashko, and the Cuban ambassador in this country, Natasha Diaz, agreed to exchange experiences in the protocols of confrontation against COVID-19 in both countries. Both representatives exchanged information on the epidemiological situation regarding the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus in each nation. The Cuban ambassador commented on the island's efforts to halt the spread of the infection and, in particular, on the process of mass vaccination of the child population with national immunizers. The Ukrainian minister referred to Kiev's decision to develop a platform for the development of biotechnological innovation in which Cuba and Ukraine could implement joint projects. The meeting discussed the possibilities of collaboration in the treatment of diabetic foot ulcer with the use of Heberprop P. Oncology, epidemiology, and cardiology are some scientific medical areas of collaboration to be defined. We'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. South Africa's indigenous Khoi and San peoples have gone to court to block the construction of the planned African headquarters for online retail giant Amazon. The indigenous communities claim the project will ruin a historically significant riverside landmark in Cape Town and damage the environment. Amazon's African headquarters, with a cost of $262 million, is already underway on Khoisan people's sacred lands as the site of the first resistance to European settlers in 1510. The Khoisan Indigenous Traditional Council of Gorin, Chai, Kona, and the Neighborhood Association have asked the Western Cape High Court to stop the construction works. The Khoi and San were some of the country's earliest inhabitants, and their presence in the southern tip of Africa dates back thousands of years. Their lands were lost to colonial settlement in the 17th century.
We will give not only this generation, but the 7 generations into the future for which we are responsible. Something tangible to hold on to in the process of finding the pathway to restoration, restitution, and recognition of First Nations people.
We want it to be a place that we can return to say that this is the place where true healing will begin, that absolute restorative justice, restorations and reparations for our people will begin. And these are the reasons why we are here in court. We want an interdict to stop the bulldozers, and the second...
So in essence, our argument is that the cultural heritage rights, particularly of indigenous people, are being infringed by this construction, and that it ought to be stopped until such time as the court has decided on the validity of the authorizations which permit it.
Protesters staged a demonstration in front of the Spanish energy giant Repsol's offices in Lima after the Peruvian coast was polluted following an oil spill. Almost 1 million liters of crude spilled into the sea on Saturday when tanker was hit by waves while offloading at La Pampilla refinery in Ventanilla, 30 kilometers north of Lima. Refinery officials originally described the spill as limited and said it was working with authorities to clean up the beaches. The refinery could face a fine of up to $34.5 million, the Environment Ministry said on Monday as prosecutors opened an investigation into the company for environmental contamination. On Tuesday, the energy and mining regulation body, Osnurgman, ordered the suspension of operations at the refinery pending an investigation into the causes of the spill. Russia's and United States foreign ministers described Friday's bilateral meeting in Geneva as forthright and meaningful. The meeting between Lavrov and Blinken concluded with Washington pledging to provide a written response to Moscow's security concerns related to the crisis in Ukraine. After meeting for nearly 2 hours, the diplomats said their talk was not polemical but a candid exchange of worries and ideas. Moscow heard from the U.S. a repetition of the arguments about a non-existent plan to invade Ukraine, and Secretary of State Blinken promised to give a written response to the Russian proposal on security next week. Moscow's request submitted last month included a guarantee that Ukraine should never join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
These papers that the State Department prepared specifically for today's meeting, they are impossible to read. While we have special divisions headed by official ministry staffers, it is their duty to study all of that, and a response has already followed. I don't think it needs any further comments. You could be flipping through it and opening it at any page at random to be convinced that none of it holds up to any kind of critical analysis, and in majority of cases is simply blatant lies. We had a sincere talk about it with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken today. He agreed on the need to be more sensible in conducting this dialogue, and I hope emotions boil down, although there are no guarantees. I haven't heard any point today that would justify the U.S. position on what is happening on the Russian-Ukrainian border. Only concerns, concerns, concerns.
Meanwhile, United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken reiterated the same rhetoric that his country and its allies would impose a swift, severe, and united response to any form of aggression from Russia.
The discussion today with Minister Lavrov was frank and substantive. I conveyed the position of the United States and our European allies and partners that we stand firmly with Ukraine in support of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. We've been clear. If any Russian military forces move across Ukraine's border, that's a renewed invasion. It will be met with swift, severe, and a united response from the United States and our partners and allies.
Also, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met with Swiss Federal President Ignacio Cassis following Friday's critical security talks with his U.S. counterpart in Geneva. Lavrov thanked Switzerland for providing the right atmosphere for dialogue and hoped to solve numerous problems on the agenda of the international community. We have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Hi, welcome back. In Nigeria on Thursday, jihadists kidnapped 20 children in a town from Borno State where Islamist militants wage a more than decade-long insurgency. According to a community leader and presidents from Piemi village, there is WAP troop dressed in military uniforms started shooting and looting shops. Witnesses said the attackers shot dead 2 people and took away 13 girls and 7 boys aged between 12 and 15. This came as Nigeria struggles with a string of abduction for ransom attacks on schools by criminal gangs. UNICEF reported that 1,500 school children were seized last year in 20 mass kidnappings due to the jihadist conflict in the northeast of the country. And on Friday, Palestinians and human rights activists protested over Jerusalem's house evictions and demolitions. Israeli police evicted a Palestinian family from a disputed property in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah before demolishing the building and leaving some 15 people homeless on a cold, rainy day. The Salihah family said they purchased the property before 1967, while the state has argued against the family's claims in court. After several years in that process, a Jerusalem judge last year ruled in favor of the city and authorized the eviction. Dozens of Palestinian families in East Jerusalem are at risk of eviction by Jewish settler organizations, and thousands face the threat of demolition because of discriminatory policies that make it extremely difficult for Palestinians to build new homes or expand existing ones. Palestinian authorities asked the United Nations to intervene in the issue to put an end to the exercise of racist crimes that Israel carries out in its attempt to occupy larger portions of Palestine's territory under Zionist rule. The Department of Negotiations of the Palestinian Liberation Organization claimed that the evictions and demolitions are the result of the international community's silence on the matter. Answering this call, the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees urged Israeli authorities to bring to an immediate end all of its criminal activities in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The Islamic State attacked a Syrian prison housing fellow jihadists and a military base in Iraq in near-simultaneous deadly operations that revived fears of an ISIS resurgence. The jihadist group has yet to comment on the attacks, and there is no indication that they are coordinated, but according to analysts, they strongly suggest ISIS is trying to boost its ranks and arsenal in an attempt to reorganize across both countries. As these operatives launched their bid to free some of the estimated 3,500 fellow fighters jailed at Goeren prison in the Syrian city of Hazake. The jihadists killed 11 soldiers in an attack on an army base in the east of neighboring Iraq, considered as the group's deadliest operation in Iraq this year. ISIS has carried out regular attacks against Kurdish and other targets in Syria since March 2019. Now, Syria continues its struggle to overcome the aftermath of the war and the effects of the blockade. The educational and scientific training of the children who are the country's hope for a better future constitutes one of the vital aspects of this struggle, where the role played by the Organization of Syrian Pioneers in cooperation with the Ministry of Education is highlighted. From Damascus, our correspondent Hisham Wanouz has a report.
The 38th Annual Conference of the Syrian Pioneers Organization, held this week at the Al-Assad National Library in Damascus, provided a platform for exchanging views and putting forward new ideas and projects to consolidate the institution's work and improve its interaction with other governmental entities, in particular the Syrian Ministry of Education, to advance the intellectual, psychological, and social training of the country's children.
The Al-Baas Pioneers Organization developed its work in coordination and cooperation with the Syrian Ministry of Education and the Teachers Union, and these institutions work together in a complementary way to consolidate a patriotic sense of belonging among the children and to build a new, well-educated generation through a comprehensive educational process. The Organization of Pioneers of Syria makes enormous efforts for the intellectual development of the children of the country, and they do it in coordination with the Ministry of Education, and proof of this is the virtual magazine of pioneers that was launched as part of this work, that I hope it will count on the participation and contribution of all the children from Syria to enrich the infantile culture.
The participation of the Pioneers Organization in the development of primary schools courses, the creation of a public school as a national center for children's activities, the launch of an interactive virtual platform of the Pioneers magazine, as well as the representation of the organization in legal and judicial bodies defending children's rights, are the main goals to be achieved this year to improve the level of educational and scientific training of the new generations in Syria.
This virtual magazine platform aimed at children complements educational courses developed by the Ministry of Education, and we hope that we will continue the work to help us to keep up with technological and scientific progress worldwide in order to contribute in the most suitable way to the reconstruction of our homeland.
The launching of the virtual platform of the Pioneers magazine takes place within the framework of meeting the global and modern educational parameters in the field of distance learning in order to reach all the children of the country at any time, despite all the difficult circumstances, especially the limitations caused by the pandemic of the new coronavirus that is sweeping the world.
The National Museum in Damascus recently hosted the children's exhibition Fragrance of Jasmine in November, with the participation of 500 pioneers from all over the country, one of numerous activities that the Syrian Pioneers Organization, despite the difficult conditions resulting from the war, the blockade and the COVID-19 pandemic, has not ceased to organize as part of its work to develop the creative and innovative talents of children, to root their attachment and belongings to the homeland, and to consolidate their faith in a better future.
Hisham Wanouz.teleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
In Yemen, rescue workers are scrambling for survivors in the rubble of a prison in the city of Sa'ada that was targeted by an airstrike on Friday. At least 100 people have been killed or injured. The Saudi-led coalition on Saturday denied carrying out an airstrike on a prison in Yemen's rebel-held North groups that 8 groups said killed at least 70 people, including migrants, women, and children. Claimed the military coalition ordered the raid, which reduced buildings to rubble and left rescuers scrabbling for survivors with their bare hands, were groundless, the alliance said. Saudi Arabia has led a coalition of Arab states in a war against the rebels since 2015, which has devastated Yemen. Tens of thousands of civilians, including more than 10,000 children, have been killed or injured as a direct result of the fighting. We've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at @TeleSUR English. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For @TeleSUR English, I'm Dio Martin. Thanks for watching.